Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in to today's webcast, Turning Pandemic into Profitable Protection with Managed Services, sponsored by Barracuda. I'd like to remind you all that this is a live webcast. We'll be taking questions at the end of the broadcast, and you'll be receiving a copy of this recording via email tomorrow. Now, before we get started, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. Our first speaker is Mark Balaguer. Mark is a systems engineer at Barracuda MSP. He's been with the Barracuda team since 2016. Prior to joining Barracuda MSP, Mark was a network security specialist at Fortinet and a Cisco certified security professional at Cisco Systems. Mark has over 12 years of experience in the field, and he's witnessed the rapid evolution of the security landscape and is a trusted source of information and best practices on the topic. Welcome, Mark. Our second speaker is Nick Cavalancia. Nick is a Microsoft Cloud and Data Center MVP, is CEO of Conversational Geek, and has over 25 years of enterprise IT experience. Nick is an accomplished consultant, speaker, trainer, writer, and columnist. He's achieved numerous industry certifications and was once accused of not having enough digits in his MCP number. Nick regularly speaks, writes, and blogs for some of the most recognized tech companies today on a variety of topics. Welcome, Nick. And now I'll hand things over to Nick to get started.
Thank you very much, Em. Good stuff. Hey, welcome everybody to today's webcast. I'm very excited about today's topic, this idea of we're in the middle of a pandemic, and yet at the same time, you guys are trying to figure out how do I actually make myself profitable. Having been a former MSP owner, I feel your pain. And sort of as I think about this, now that some of your customers are maybe some or all of your customers are working remotely, you've got to get them sort of past that first hurdle, which of course is just getting them operational. Assuming that that's actually done, the working from home still sort of makes them prone to cyber attack, which is where our topic revolves around today. And since we're seeing attacks increasing, it's sort of necessary for you guys as MSPs to begin offering some form of security services if you're not already doing it, but not all of you, of course, are necessarily ready to do this. And so the question kind of becomes, how do you go from, let's say, no security services, as it were, to offering security services in a sort of a quick way, but also a profitable way, such that it actually helps your customer and their remote workforce? So that's what Mark and I are going to talk about today. Hey, Mark, welcome and thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, Nick. Really looking forward to chatting today.
Yeah, we should have a good conversation. Now, this webcast is a little different. You've noticed I haven't even moved past the today's speaker slide yet. You're not missing anything. You're not missing any slides. As a matter of fact, there's very few slides in today's webcast. Rather than trying to do one of those traditional, 85 slides in just 20 minutes, one of those death by PowerPoint presentations, this is very much focused instead on the conversation that Mark and I are going to have here. So the format's a little different. I want you to kind of participate as you'd like to. Put questions in the Q&A box throughout. If you've got questions, comments, anecdotes, something you just care to share, stick that in the Q&A box. We'll be happy to make sure we include you in on the conversation because I've got that box up here in front of me. And you're just going to sit back and enjoy the conversation. Think of the slides as more visual indicators of what we're talking about as opposed to being the focus. And that's why there's so few slides as it is. So the place that we're going to start here is the idea of that your remote workforce is putting the customer at risk. Now, there's a couple things that have happened as you've transpired in what I'm calling affectionately the shift. There was the snap with Thanos, right? And that half the people got wiped out. There was the blip, what they call the 5 years. I'm just calling this the shift. We've all gone through the shift and now everyone's working remotely. And of course, initially, the focus for all of you is to figure out how do I get the customers and their users all productive? How do they get access to their systems, their data? They have connectivity, collaboration, all those kinds of things. And neither you nor your customer is thinking about security during that time frame, and probably even today your customers still aren't thinking about security. They're still just focused on how do I make this work? Wait, how do I get connected to my coworkers again? Am I using that Skype thing or that Teams thing? How does this work? And so they're not even thinking about security at all in that case. And then, in fact, if you think about it from a user perspective and them being sort of the front lines of potentially this remote workforce security, there's a couple things that sort of work against them. They're certainly distracted. I think all of us that are working from home, you've got kids walking in and out. In fact, I just had my son walk into my office because I work from home every day anyway, so that's okay by me. But he came in my office just a few moments ago and grabbed something off the printer. I mean, those things happen. We're distracted from regular business. At the same time, those users are still adapting. That example I just gave about, am I supposed to use Teams and how do I make that work? Do I use it in the web browser? Or do I have that icon somewhere on my desktop? Those kinds of things. They're trying to figure out how to get the operations going. And then in a lot of cases, they're working around controls. So you think about how you used to have very specific ways that they did business. It could be something as simple as you just store files up on the J drive. And now there is no J drive. And so they're trying to figure out, how do I do that? And if they haven't been properly trained, let's say, or they don't entirely get it, they're like, I have my Dropbox. I'll just put it up there and I'll share it because I know how that works. That kind of thing. So users are working around, they're not really thinking about the organizational security, all at the same time where cyber criminals are certainly increasing their efforts. I just read yesterday there's like 1.5 million campaigns that have been detected in just March alone, the last half of March alone, around just COVID and coronavirus related phishing campaigns. They're just stepping up the game here because they know that these people are, again, distracted. They're adapting. They're working around controls, things like that, and working on home devices. All those things come into play. It's a playground for cyber criminals. And so it sort of ends up being that, in essence, from the MSP's perspective, offering some kind of security service is an absolute need as part of your core arsenal. So the place, Mark, where I'm thinking I want to start, I've done enough talking here, I think. Maybe we can start with the why, as it were, as in why should our audience realize that their customers using a remote workforce or working in a remote kind of scenario, why are they most likely, those customers, why are they at risk? So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely, and great question. And I think you hit a lot of it on the head already. But it really comes down to people are vulnerable because of those distractions. And the big one is you kind of alluded to it with that Dropbox situation, is all corporate governance goes out the window. So that J drive is no longer there. How am I going to share this? Or that firewall that was protecting my device is no longer active because I'm working from home and I don't have that same level of protection. But I never had to worry about it at the office. So what am I going to do now? And so all these things related to content filtering and security and sharing information are all now kind of points of attack that attackers are unfortunately very smart and very aware of, and are trying to do their best to get in. And so you just really need to be conscious of what customers are going through, because at the end of the day, they're just trying to get their job done, and not necessarily as concerned about security as they probably should be, because they have to continue their business and stay operational.
No, great points. It all makes perfect sense, and that's the operational is the big key here. And I sort of see, cybersecurity isn't about just a threat like, oh, they might cost some money, or they might shut down a workstation or two. This is about remaining operational and having an ability to do that. And so this is more of an operational threat than it is just a cyber threat. So, Mark, I'm thinking about, if an attack happens, what are some of the repercussions that you've seen MSP customers experience, maybe already with this shift to a remote workforce?
Yeah, I mean, a tough situation for everybody, really. How are people handling this? Different businesses have different capabilities as far as the remote workforce is enabled. But absolute worst case scenario, you're seeing organizations go out of business just because they can't work effectively, or they can't adapt fast enough, or didn't have the opportunity, or even worse, they were attacked and something was compromised, and now they just can't stay operational. So that's the absolute worst that could happen in this case. But again, some additional things, if you're sharing sensitive information over an unsecured drive or something like that, I mean, when audits and compliance come around, you can be out of compliance. That can be fines, that can be sensitive information potentially actually getting lost, and you not being aware of it. And just being more susceptible to attack. So it's kind of an overarching thing, but again, that attack plane gets much larger when all those traditional corporate protections are in place. And so, yeah, we're unfortunately seeing some organizations have gone out of business just because they weren't able to stay secure and stay operational and functional.
Yeah, I see a lot of operational issues that come in. Even if nothing else, less profitable is probably maybe a little more likely than going out of business. But I agree, going out of business is ultimately what can happen, especially right now when if there's not as much work, there's not as many people walking through the door, or giving you a phone call because they're distracted too and trying to adapt to their own work jobs if they're working remotely and that kind of thing. I think it's quite feasible to see that happening here. Now, if Mark, if I can not so much put you on the spot, but we talked about this a little bit beforehand. You guys at the Barracuda MSP are going through this yourself. So maybe what are some of the lessons learned that you could share with the audience to apply to their customers?
Yeah, absolutely. We migrated at Barracuda over 1,200 people to full-time remote workers, and there were a lot of things that went into that. Understanding what access people needed, because when everyone was at the office, everyone's credentials were there and everything was stored there. And then when they moved remotely, it's like, well, what type of VPN connection does this person need, or do they need a VPN connection, or do they have the right access from their remote location? And then some of the other things is that like you mentioned before, is those distractions. So a lot of people, I think, started working from home and realized I don't have a good place to do my work. I'm not very productive because I sit on my couch, and that's great if I want to hang out and watch Netflix for a couple hours, but it's not a good place to sit down and focus and do work. And some of those other maybe sort of intangible things that you can't really kind of standardize on. It's just some adapting and people learning how to cope with this. And then, as a company, Barracuda trying to be flexible and make sure that we're enabling everyone as best as possible to get that access. And so it's important, I think, to be sensitive of what everyone's going through, because everyone's situation is a little bit different. But it's interesting finding out things that maybe you weren't aware of before, or gosh, this person needs this full VPN access because I wasn't aware that this was their actual responsibility, or this was something they were working on, or that sort of thing. So just lots of little things kind of pile up and makes it really challenging to have that transition. So so far, I think we've been very fortunate, but definitely lots of things to consider you probably didn't think of before this all happened.
Yeah, that's the big issue here. I think no one thought about this before it happened, because we, as much as we do business impact analysis and do a risk assessment and things like that for like business continuity plans, I don't think anybody ever thought so much like if there's I mean, I'm sure there's some organization somewhere that has a pandemic plan, sure, but but for the most part, yeah, having an idea to to kind of what do we do with everyone that goes works remotely, both from an operational and a security standpoint. That seems a little out there for most organizations that are trying to plan for the likelihood of any given disruption, and this is certainly one. So let's do this. Let's talk a little bit about a layered security strategy. So for you guys in the audience, as you're thinking about ways that you might offer services, I want you to be thinking about this as a layered security strategy. I'm going to guess that most of your customers are doing some kind of hybrid approach. You've just heard Mark talk about things like maybe using a VPN so they can get from their home network into the office, and then theoretically, logically be in the office, so to speak, accessing applications and data and things like that in the same way. So that means you've got sort of an on-premises environment that is accessible remotely, some way, shape, or form. Hopefully not via RDP. Please don't do that. Close every RDP port. That is the number one way that attackers get in and do ransomware attacks. So don't do that. But maybe it's VPN or something like that. And you've also got then sort of this extended network that includes every single user and their device and all their home networks and so on. And the idea here is really that you have to be thinking about the entire environment. You have to be thinking about, if it's cloud-based services, you have to think about where the endpoints exist, at every single home, which effectively becomes like, if you've got a customer with, let's say, 25 employees, you have 25 branch offices now that you're now all responsible for, that sort of thing, as well as the core office with its data center or server room or whatever the case is. So you got to think about the entire environment, and you've got to think about this in terms of utilizing layers of protection, where each layer tries to address the issues of, let's say in this case, protecting against cyber attacks a little bit differently than the one before it. So the way that I look at this is I've kind of got this, you see this sort of, this is what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different layers here. I forgot how many I even put in here. And I kind of want to walk through each of these with you. And I sort of start with the idea of the perimeter. The perimeter in my mind in this case is a logical perimeter, because it's no longer everyone working within the protective walls of the organization's network. The perimeter goes all the way out to basically I don't know, Susan in accounts payable working on her Chromebook laptop that's her own personal one, or she brought it from her kids or something, and that's what she's connecting to the web with. I mean, that's now part of your perimeter. That is, you have to extend all the way out there for how do I put in layers of protection in that kind of environment as well. So, and then also you're also thinking of the traditional kinds of perimeters, like things like where email coming in or people surfing out to the web, anything like that where there's data going in and out, so egress and ingress of information, as much as that applies to your customers' organizations. Next one is the user. Think about the user themselves. They are now a part of the security line of defense, and making sure that you have a way to both empower the user to play a role, as well as sort of protect the user against themselves. And what I mean by that is, in a practical application terms, things like maybe security awareness training that would help empower the user. But for those users that maybe just don't get it or don't take the training or whatever the case is, you still got some of those protective solutions in place that's going to help, like let's say endpoint detection and response, or antivirus or anti-malware on the desktop. I mean, something that protects the user as well kind of comes into play here. Then there's this issue of identity, and having an ability to protect identity, especially where the issue at hand is users are, let's say, trying to log on to something like Office 365. And there's a lot of brand impersonation that goes on with phishing attacks today, where bad guys are basically saying, hey, I need you to check out this document. There's a problem with the emails that's sent, or there's some kind of sense of urgency thing, and I need you to log on to Office 365 to retrieve it, see what it is, whatever. And then they're presented with a very realistic looking copy, a spoof of Office 365's logon, and they steal their credentials. So putting things like multi-factor authentication, those kinds of things in place could actually help as well. Then you've got the idea of privilege. This is definitely, it's a lot of work. You have a lot already going on with your customers, but thinking about establishing, making sure you got principles of like least privilege in play. That would be really smart at this point, to make sure that only those people that need to have elevated privileges have it, merely because, again, with every layer, you're assuming the previous layers have failed. So if something got through the perimeter, got all the way to the user, they clicked on something, it stole their credentials, and now the credentials give elevated access to something, that's where you want to minimize that. This is more about just minimizing the threat surface by limiting who has privileged access to whatever that is. Next one is the applications, and this could be on-prem applications, could be on an endpoint applications, it could be cloud applications. Thinking about how do I protect those, and then ultimately thinking about protecting your data. Now, with the idea here is you're probably not going to cover all of these layers. And this, by the way, is not a comprehensive list of layers either. I mean, if you were to go over, let's say, the MITRE ATT&CK framework, there's other aspects of the attack surface that come into play, but it's a good way to look at it from a business standpoint. These are basically some of the areas you're going to focus on. Typically, MSPs try to focus on the top two. They're thinking about protecting the endpoint, they're protecting the perimeter with some kind of, like scanning, email scanning, web scanning, DNS scanning, those kinds of type solutions, maybe users with security awareness training, endpoint protection on the endpoints. So these areas are the ones that get implemented, but having all of these as a goal is certainly really good. And then the way that you should be approaching this isn't just what technology do I want to put in play. It's really starting off with what are the needs, the business needs of your customer. And that could be based on sort of how they operate today, which there's now, even if you have a lot of different kinds of industry verticals represented in your portfolio of customers, they now all kind of are working the same way. And you have some kind of common ground now. And then you work from those business needs back to what the tech solution is my thinking here. So Mark, a couple of questions I wrote down for this slide. I focused off a lot here, I think, on security more than anything. Do you think that security should be the only focus here when we're talking about a layered strategy, or are there some other aspects that should come into play?
Yeah, absolutely, great question. And I'm a security engineer, so absolutely it should be the only thing. But realistically, that can't be true, right? And so, my favorite part of this slide, I think, is the start with the business needs and work towards the tech solution, because you're going to need a balance between security, compliance, and productivity. So, all those boxes need to be checked. But you need to make sure at the end of the day that it's meeting the business needs for the customer. If you walk in somewhere and say, yeah, we can do VPNs in 18 different ways, and we can protect this and filter that and do this other thing, it's not going to mean anything to anyone, because they're going to be like, why am I doing this? How does this help me? What does it matter? And so, like you said, you start from that business need and work backwards and figure out the solutions that you can put into place to really help that customer succeed and be more productive and be more successful.
What are some of the ways that you've seen in the field where, with productivity being the focus here, but ways you've seen productivity actually help security and compliance needs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big one here is VPN. Different people have different needs when connecting to an office. Do they need, when they're working remotely, do they need an in-office experience like an always-on VPN connection that's probably taking up quite a bit of bandwidth and processing, but they need access to everything just like they're in the office? Or are they a person who maybe just needs to log in at the end of the day and upload some data, or maybe they just need access through a mobile device and they just need to check on things occasionally, checking in on something. And so making sure that they get that right kind of access and in a secure way is going to be very important, again, going along with that compliance and productivity balance as well. And I guess the other thing I'd see is kind of that data question mark. Someone who's maybe not very technical and it's just like you said before, I just put it on the J drive and that J drive's not there anymore. So what am I going to do now? And so being able to help facilitate that. So maybe they have a cloud solution. Maybe they're using you start using something like OneDrive, or maybe you give them a secure connection to that J drive that they know how to access. And so just making sure that you have that implemented in the way that's going to make the customer successful.
No, I agree, and that's actually important because that example of just sticking with J drive and let's say OneDrive, even if you VPN'd in and then had them map to a J drive, that certainly wouldn't be probably as efficient in terms of both sending and receiving files as it would be with, let's say, something like OneDrive where you can sync down to a local store and those kinds of things. So there's definitely I agree there's some different ways you could utilize technology to implement that. So I came up with my 6 layers here, and I sort of admitted that it's not comprehensive by any means. So is there anything you think that I missed? And it's absolutely fine if I did. I just, from your own perspective, anything you'd add to this list of layered strategy?
No, I love the layered strategy approach. The one thing I could see is, I don't know where it would fit on the layers, maybe just a big pancake on the top or on the bottom, would be something related to reporting. Just making sure you're keeping track of the information, keeping track of activity, and seeing maybe there's ways to better tune the environment, or maybe you're noticing, hey, this this connection is really choked up and it's inhibiting our traffic flow, so it's slowing everything down. Do we need to buy a little bit more bandwidth from somewhere? Or looks like we're getting a lot of threats coming through. Maybe we need to tighten down some of our security policies. Or someone's streaming HD video and that's taking up a lot of bandwidth and they shouldn't be doing that. So let's address that. But I really like this approach. Keeping things segmented, but also understanding that each layer is going to have a different need for a type of protection and a different potential vulnerability from an attacker perspective.
Yeah, no, totally agree there. So let's do this. I think we've established sort of the issue on the first slide. Talked a little bit about how to sort of do this from a perspective of where the MSP might want to start looking at specific kinds of solutions and specific kinds of protective layers that help with the attack surface. Maybe the next thing we can do is we kind of finish up here talking a little bit about the idea of having a managed offering and whether or not that fits the needs. So for you guys in the audience, you're thinking about, okay, great, I want to add on security services. And the whole title of this webcast and sort of the theme around it is whether or not using a managed services offering, meaning you're getting some help from a vendor, not just in terms of delivering the software, but actually them helping you do the work. It might be an opportunity for some of you. And so I know that, again, in my own experience, having been an MSP owner, sometimes there are points in your evolution of your business where there's some specific things that are lacking. Things like expertise, certainly in the area of things like cybersecurity. Maybe you don't know anything other than, I know what phishing is, I know what ransomware is, but I'm not really an expert on like what the attack surface looks like, what a kill chain looks like. I don't know how attackers are getting in. I understand some basic content, but you're just lacking that expertise in the whole thing. At the same time, you may not even have time to do this. You may be down a couple of people on your bench, and now you're picking up the slack yourself as a business owner. You're trying to figure out, how do I deliver these new services when I'm already busy myself, that kind of thing. And then again, that idea of a limited bench, perhaps maybe you don't have enough people to actually execute this either. And so in circumstances like this, then leveraging a partner that's going to help with a managed offering is an option. And so there's a couple of benefits that I'm thinking about here. One is sort of a faster delivery time, because what you're doing is you're getting a team of people that already have the expertise of how to implement this and implement it properly, and have already figured out a way to do this in a way that makes MSPs successful. So you certainly get a faster delivery time, so a faster time to market in essence. You decide, I think I want to offer security services. In theory, you could be up and running in, whatever it is, days or weeks instead of months or quarters, and that kind of thing. I don't want to make any promises because it depends on what platform you use and which vendor, and and so on and so forth. But and then you also have sort of better execution, because you already have a team of people behind you that have done this before and are participating in it on a daily basis, helping you do certain aspects of your security operations. Maybe it's doing some monitoring, and then maybe even doing some remediation, or just depending on what's offered. But thinking about having an outsourced staff that is already an expert at doing this means you're going to execute probably better than if you did it and you get it. Maybe you get it already. Maybe you have the expertise personally, but none of your techs do, for the sake of argument. You're still going to get better execution because you don't scale. All of you and all your techs can scale, but if none of you have the same level of expertise, or at least a close level of expertise, it's hard to scale that business and add more and more services on. In this case, with a partnered team helping with managed offering, better execution. The instant staffing, I think I've already kind of talked about that, but you instantly have a team of people. And then the last one here is you also get to increase the offerings probably more than you would have if you had done it on yourself. If you decide, all right, I'm going to go ahead and put in antivirus and put something else, endpoint protection, maybe some email scanning, and you go, I'm going to stop there. Well, maybe you don't have to. Maybe you can also then help and implement very quickly for those customers that would utilize it, maybe security awareness training and some other layers of security that, if you were to build out some kind of pricing model of a good, better, best, where you've got a couple of service offerings with good and a few more with better and a whole bunch of them with best, kind of a thing, maybe you can get customers to better and best a lot faster than just simply by offering good, as it were. Mark, I don't see this problem as being sort of necessarily new. I mean, this is something that's been around for a while, regardless if people are remote or not. Just sort of needed more quickly in this case because of the increased risk. So, what are some of the sort of the common shortcomings that you've seen MSPs have when they're trying to add on a new service, relatively quickly?
Yeah, I really like this slide, and you hit some great points here. And I think the biggest ones you mentioned is really speed and scalability. So if you're not an expert at configuring firewalls, but maybe you set one up for your customers a while back and put in some content filtering, but there was maybe no need for VPNs, and now all of a sudden everyone needs a VPN connection. You don't want to be in a situation where you're having to try to learn how to set all this up, and time is essential here. And so you're going to be able to have a faster deployment there. And also, kind of going along with that is the education. I mean, it takes time to get used to these configurations and understanding all the things that go into them. And so it's a struggle sometimes I've seen for MSPs, trying to get their customers in a place where they can be successful and be productive without having any experience of doing that particular task or configuring that particular thing in the past. And so it's just a little bit of a delay, either to get them educated or to try and error to make sure it's set up properly. And so it just kind of comes with its own slew of challenges and getting that ramp up.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I like the word delay. I think that's probably the right word. It's going to take longer no matter what. Longer to get configured, to get set up, to get established, to become proficient. I mean, it's longer, and there's a delay in everything. And this sort of just sums it up. Now, I don't know if I gave a definition, but I sort of painted a picture of what a managed offering looks like. And I know I'm coming at it from a very, sort of generic perspective here. How would you define it? Even though, yes, you're a vendor that does this offering, so maybe in your best, vendor neutral voice kind of a thing. But how would you define managed offering, both in sort of concept and in execution?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you did a great job. I see it as a partnership that's going to allow the MSP to focus on the customer needs, and then they're going to focus on the partner to do that implementation. So the MSP is going to understand what those customer needs are, who needs access to what, and how they need access, and what all these security concerns might be, but they're not going to maybe be an expert on configuring that or building that VPN tunnel or adjusting those credentials or whatever that might be. And so that's where they can lean on the MSP to do that kind of legwork and do the heavy lifting of configuring it and setting it up, making sure that it's going to meet those customer needs. And so they're going to be the link from that business need from the customer, and then having that provisioned from a technical standpoint to their partner. And so I think that's that real value of that managed service and kind of what defines it there. So I guess, and then just to answer your other question, yeah, because the benefits and what you're getting there is you're getting that that expertise very, very quickly, like you mentioned before, and kind of eliminating that delay that's going to be there by having basically a team of experts immediately at your side to help you do this implementation. You understand that business need, they understand the technical resources and aspects to get that put into place, and then you can very quickly be successful for your customers.
That's perfect. So I'm thinking that some of the audience may not know where they should start. I mean, if you think back to the previous slide, and each of those 6 layers that I covered is sort of another attack surface that could be part of a cyber kill chain, as it were. So and there's lots of layers, and plus you could break that down into, even you said, a couple of things like maybe some auditing and some reporting, and there's lots of things they could be doing. So where do you suggest that they begin?
Yeah, great question. And I honestly, I think you hit it on a couple slides ago, is you want to understand that business need first. So talk with your customers. So, hey, I know, you used to be in the office, everyone was there, you had these shared drives, so-and-so had access to this and other person was focused on that project. What's happened? Have you all had to work remotely? Has that been successful? What's the need moving forward? And then once you can kind of understand that, then you can understand, well, you're using Dropbox. Well, there's some potential vulnerabilities there, some potential issues there, and then you can kind of work with them to make that a secure environment. But again, starting with those business needs is going to be key to make sure you have that understanding, and then you can build that technical solution around it, and then work backwards from there, and get engaged with partnerships and additional education.
No, I think that's a good way to be thinking about this. So let's do this. I know you've got a couple slides. Let me go ahead and sum things up for the audience. I'll hand things over to you. We have a couple of questions that have already come in. If you guys in the audience have any other questions about anything we're talking about now or anything that Mark's about to cover right now as well, by all means, stick those in the Q&A box. Be happy to answer those. But just to kind of sum up everything we've been talking about today, you're trying to, as an MSP, to figure out, how do I get security services to market? And the idea here is there's an opportunity then to speed that up, leveraging managed services. You know that your customers, because of, they already were at risk, there's already a certain amount of risk, a certain threat landscape that already exists, a threat footprint, if you will, within any given one of your customers. But the fact that now that everyone's remote, using personal devices, using a personal network that may or may not be secure, they're now going directly, let's say, to Office 365, that kind of thing, there's a lot more risk involved. The attacks are increasing because the bad guys they're very savvy. They're trying to identify exactly where they have the least amount of what's the word I want to use, where they were people putting up some sort of defense, and are fighting against, being vigilant and that kind of thing. And this is a really good time for a cyber criminal, because people, again, are very distracted and that sort of thing. And so your customers need some form of a layered security strategy, something that's going to try and address some of those different 6 areas that I talked about. And you don't have to do all of them. And that's not the important thing, to do something for at least 1 or 2 of them, kind of, I think, get something in place to help protect your customers. And whether or not you have the ability to execute, you might find that leveraging a partner may actually provide you with a better ability to execute, both in, again, getting it configured, set up and running, maybe even managing it on a daily basis. In some cases, the opportunity even exists to have this completely hands-off and you've outsourced it entirely, and it's still one of the services you offer, and you still make some kind of margin on it, which turns this into a predictable and profitable business. So hopefully this helps a little bit. And with that, Mark, I'm going to go ahead and sort of hand the floor to you, and then we'll do Q&A at the end.
Great, thanks a lot. Well, yeah, the first thing I'd like to talk about is the managed PhishLine service. And so what I'm referring to here is this is security awareness training that you can provide your customers to make them smarter and better at identifying potential threats. So unfortunately, the state of everything is that the human firewall is the weakest link. You could have the best security gateway, the best firewall, the best email filtering, the best whatever. If someone decides to pick up a phone call, if someone's saying they're Microsoft and gives away their credentials, you've got an issue. Or if someone says, hi, this is the CEO, I need you to send me $1,000 worth of Amazon gift cards, you're going to have a situation. And so we want to be sure that we're educating that weakest link so that they can alert the security team and not click on those links, and make sure that they turn into an asset rather than a liability of helping you defend and protect the environment. And so what we're talking about with this product is we want to make sure that again, that education is happening, but also it has become a requirement for a lot of compliance to make sure that employees are all trained on the latest types of attacks and what they should be aware of. And so it's a good tool to help you kind of meet those requirements as well. The real benefit here, though, and when we say manage PhishLine, the idea is that a campaign is being built for your customer to go ahead and essentially phish themselves, but instead of them, when they click a link, having something really, really bad happen, they're just going to be redirected to an educational page or a quick video or some kind of training to let them know, hey, this is, you shouldn't have clicked this, and this is why you shouldn't have clicked this, and this is what you should have looked for in that email to get a little bit more understanding about why this happened and what you should look for to not have it happen in the future. So obviously very important to make sure that employees are currently aware of these trends and attacks coming through. But again, the real value with the managed piece is that you're not going to have to be building these campaigns. And I always try to put it this way: if you are a large company, maybe 2,000 people, you're head of IT, and you're building this campaign once every 3 months, you build this and you gather the data and get the reports and see. Maybe Susie needs a talking to because she clicks on every link that comes through, or Bill needs some little extra training because he wasn't quite sure what was going on when he received the email. Whatever that might be, you can get that information and go ahead and work to make improvements with those customers. So that's great. That's one campaign you've got to run for your 2,000 employees or coworkers every 3 months. Well, the trouble with MSPs is they might still be managing those 2,000 different users, but now it might be spread across 20 different organizations. And so now that means that's 20 different campaigns that you've got to run and build every 3 months and get the reporting and deliver that back. And it just becomes a monumental task. It could be someone's full-time job essentially to be able to do this. And so with the managed service, all you're going to need to do is provide us the emails of the people that you want included in the program. Our experts are going to build the campaign for you, execute the campaign, and then deliver you the reporting, and then you can have that conversation with your customers. So it's a really fast and easy way to provide a lot of value and education to your customers without having to do a lot of heavy lifting and legwork. You're just having that conversation with them. Hey, it looks like we need to talk to so-and-so about their activity, or hopefully they'll improve on the next round, and watch that progress as it happens. So again, very powerful and important tool. And like I mentioned before, it has been included recently as part of a lot of compliance standards. The next thing I want to talk about is a product called Barracuda Sentinel. Now, Sentinel in itself is not a managed service, but it's very much a set it and forget it service. So Sentinel is designed as artificial intelligence to prevent spear phishing attacks. And so when I say spear phishing attacks, that's going to be an attack that doesn't have any payload, like a malicious file or a link to go to a malicious site, or asking for credentials, anything like that. This is going to be an attack where someone's really used social engineering to find out more about an organization and extract something that they can use maliciously from someone in the environment. So unfortunately, with this the pandemic, we've seen these threats spike through email by over 650%. Just our Sentinel product detected over 10,000, I believe, in March, compared to a little over 100 in January. So we've just seen exponential growth in these types of attacks. But again, that spear phishing focus is going to be something that's going to be necessary because it's eluding those traditional attacks. And so it hooks right into the O365 API. And what it's going to do is basically learn that customer's environment, understand over 40 different attributes of how people are using email, such as what accounts do they use to send email from, what time of day do they send email from, how do they sign their emails, where are they logging in from, that sort of thing. And so gathering all this information, and it's been trained on millions and millions of different mailboxes. So our false positive rate right now is about 1 in 100,000. But again, it's providing that protection for someone who is, as an attacker, is realizing, hey, it looks like this CEO is going to this conference because I saw on their Facebook page that they're heading to the airport, and I look on LinkedIn and I see their organizational chart, and this person is their head of marketing. So great, I'm going to spoof an email to this head of marketing saying, hey, in a rush to the conference. Sorry for the late notice, but I need $1,000 worth of Amazon gift cards sent to this hotel for door prizes for this concert. If you could do that right away, really appreciate it. Thanks so much. Sorry for the late notice. Signed, CEO. And so head of marketing knows that CEO is going to this conference, knows that they're in a rush, seems like a legitimate message, wants to take care of it quickly, sends off those Amazon cards. By the time they figure it out, attackers on a shopping spree, taking care of whatever they want with those Amazon cards on the company's dime. And so the reason that attack got through was because there was no malicious payload. It was just text that was going to get through a traditional email service. Well, Sentinel's going to be able to recognize that, understand that, hey, this is not a note from the actual CEO. This is something that's been compromised or been spoofed, depending if that attacker actually had access to the organization in the past, and we're going to provide protection for it. The other great thing that Sentinel can do is help protect your company's reputation. So there's a huge incident with PayPal a couple of years ago where people were getting emails saying, this is PayPal, please click here to enter your credentials. We're doing updates on our service. We want to make sure you don't experience an interruption. Emails from PayPal had PayPal's logo. You clicked on the link, went to a site that looked like PayPal. So people are like, yeah, I don't want to have an interruption. I work with PayPal all the time. It's important to whatever I'm doing. So they entered it. Next thing you know, these accounts started getting drained, compromised, all sorts of nasty things. So these people were very, very upset, and they said, hey, PayPal, you guys got hacked. Where's my money? PayPal did some analysis, did some research, took a look, and said, no, we didn't get hacked. There was no breach. You guys got phished, and you gave away your information. That may have been the fact, but the fact of the matter is, people were really, really frustrated. PayPal took a real hit because people didn't trust them and thought they were getting cheated by PayPal. And so Sentinel has a capability to monitor all of the domains that your company is sending from, or you've allowed to send on your behalf, and make sure that you've only allowed reputable domains or domains that you've approved to send upon your behalf. And how we do that is using a protocol called DMARC. And really what that is, it's built off of 2 other protocols, just making sure that you are who you say you are, and that email has not been tampered with at any time from the source until it reaches that sender. And so again, we can use Sentinel to monitor that, and so you can make sure that once that's enforced, you can use Sentinel to enforce that. No one's going to be able to send emails on your behalf, again, providing protection for your reputation. So some really powerful artificial intelligence providing protection for that next level type of attacks. And again, like I said, it's pretty much set it and forget it. It goes into the Microsoft O365 API, and then you can log in and see what's going on and have a good sense of monitoring, but it's going to protect you just by being included in there from all of those kind of advanced type social engineering spear phishing threats. And then the last piece I wanted to talk about was our managed firewall as a service. So best part about this is the management piece and what you're getting with that, and that's a full SOC. So you're not going to have to worry about 24/7 staying up waiting for that phone call. Oh no, something's broke. Oh no, something's not working. Come fix it. It's 2 in the morning. We're going to be taking care of all that. So monitoring, management, remediation, 24/7 included with that service cost. The great part about this is, like I said, it's like we said before, it's allowing you to very quickly ramp up, provide your customers with a security service that maybe you might not have some expertise in, but you can get them secured up and running very, very quickly. So all that needs to happen is you'll talk with our services team about that customer's needs, stuff like what's their security policy, what's their IP scheme, what does their network look like, who needs access to what, that sort of thing. Usually takes about an hour or 2. After they have that conversation and have all the information they need, they're going to go ahead and build that configuration for that customer. And then as soon as that firewall ships out, all the customer is going to need to do is plug it into the wall, plug it into the internet, get it connected. And then at that point, it's going to be pretty much out of your hands. Our services team is going to be controlling it, monitoring it, doing all of the management and anything like that. We'll be delivering you reports about the activity that you can turn around, hand your customers and say, hey, looks like these applications are getting used a lot, or it looks like you're experiencing a lot of threats, or hey, do we have a lot of traffic going to these set of countries, or should we be blocking that or adjusting policies? So really good way to have a conversation with your customer, show them the threats that you're blocking for them, showing them how you're protecting them, and making sure that, again, that they're successful as a business. So those reports are very, very valuable. But again, all of that legwork, all that heavy lifting, all those changes are going to be done by our managed services team. And you can just have that conversation with your customer about their business needs. So if something does change, customer says, hey, we need a new connection out to a new branch site. Can we get that set up? Sure, no problem. you just call or email our services team, and they'll help build that out for you right away, and then you're up and running and continue moving. So again, making sure that we can manage it for you and provide you with everything you need to show your value to your customers. So again, some great solutions we've got. This is just kind of the tip of the iceberg with the solution portfolio, but the firewall is a really, really powerful one to get your customers properly secured, properly connected, and get them access to whatever they need very, very quickly.
Well done, Mark. Good stuff. Let's do this. Let's talk about some questions that have come in from the audience. If you guys have any more questions, by all means, stick those in the Q&A box. We have, a couple of minutes here. Definitely can cover this. So first question came in here, and this is actually kind of an interesting perspective. They said, why do I need email security with Barracuda when I have Office 365, which is now, of course, Microsoft 365? I've got a vendor neutral answer, but I don't know if you want to answer first from the Barracuda perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess kind of the high level answer is that Microsoft is very good at managing infrastructure and controlling infrastructure. I would say sometimes security is a checkbox in some sense, whereas Barracuda is very focused on security and is very nimble. And we also have a great partnership with Microsoft to the extent that we've shared our roadmaps with them. We have our development teams working together on new products, like that Sentinel integration is a direct integration with Microsoft. So we have a really good partnership, and that's our specialization. The other piece I would say is that unless you're on a very, very expensive license with Microsoft, Barracuda is able to offer you advanced threat protection, which is a really key security component to make sure that nothing that you're not aware of its behavior is getting through to the firewall. So if a file comes in and we scan it and we say, hey, we've never seen this before, doesn't match a signature, we're not just going to let it on the network, because that could be a brand new zero-day attack or something like that. We want to go ahead, send that to our cloud, do some pretty resource-intensive emulations on it, simulate time, speed up mouse movement, simulate different operating systems, and detonate that file. And then once we know what that file does, then we can make a decision about it and make sure that we're not letting a new zero-day ransomware attack in that's going to corrupt the entire network. And so that's a feature that's included with our email service, and I know is very, very expensive on the Microsoft side, but again, a very critical piece to provide that zero-day type of protection.
You almost sort of stole my thunder, but not entirely. The issue here at hand is, so that's okay, it's totally fine, is that the new licensing for Microsoft 365, which was formerly Office 365, for most businesses is going to be, for very small businesses, they have the business packages, but the old sort of E1, E3, E5, E7 licenses are now, for most larger organizations, are going to be an F1, that's frontline workers, you have an E3, and you have an E5, and that advanced threat protection stuff only comes with the E5 license. So you're kind of left out from that perspective. And when you get to the smaller businesses where you're talking, let's say 15 seats, 25 seats, 50 seats, it's very costly if you're going to try and get that kind of license versus probably getting something that's designed for an MSP specifically. So I think you hit it right on the head as well. Microsoft does a great job with security. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I definitely feel that way. I also like from the layered approach strategy, that sometimes going with multiple vendors also helps provide a little more, what's the word I'm thinking of? You're really kind of some certainty around that you do have a truly layered approach, because you've got a different set of developers thinking about how to approach the problem than, from one company to another, kind of a thing. Next question is, where are you seeing the most increase in threats? And I'm sort of tying this with another question we saw, which is, can you talk more about the layered security approach? I mean, when I lay out this layer, Mark, it was sort of, I was thinking of it more of as from a threat landscape, these are the areas you want to protect. And then I liked the perspective that you brought into play, because you were thinking of it more from a standpoint of like, what kinds of services could you offer? And that's what you've talked about, like, reporting and auditing and that kind of thing. But thinking about it just purely from a, let's say it's a threat landscape kind of, the layered approach, if you will, where are you seeing the most increase in threats? And I'm going to add some words into our audience members' mouth here, and therefore, what kinds of services or what kinds of solutions should we be putting in place to try to protect against that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't emphasize it enough. Yeah, the layered approach is important. There's a lot of different threat vectors. There's a lot of things that you need to cover. You can't just, buy one thing and think it's going to protect everything. So, that said, email is by far the highest increase and most targeted, and we've seen the most increase in types of threats. It's much easier for attackers to use social engineering or use mass emails to immediately contact as many people as possible. And so, like I mentioned before, we've seen an exponential increase in those email threats through Sentinel from like 100 in January to over 10,000 in March related to the pandemic, and a lot of them are scamming. Unfortunately, they're trying to prey on people's good nature, saying things like, "Oh, invest in our company. We're developing a cure," or "Click here to donate funds for people suffering from the pandemic." And so, just as a side note, I always encourage you to, be helpful and be, altruistic, but do some research. Make sure that that money is actually going to the cause it says it is, because unfortunately, these attackers are just preying on people's generosity. The other aspect of that is they're preying on people's desire to want to be informed and to want to follow the rules in the direction set up by the government. So there's now phishing kits and stuff available that include fake maps of pandemic spread, and so when people click to download them or view them, they have malware installed. And so unfortunately, you just need to be really, really cautious about where you're getting information. And this can also come from malicious websites. If you click on a site that says the coronavirus pandemic headquarters, whatever, XYZ, and download information, it's possible that could be malware involved as well. So that potentially coming through the firewall or coming through a USB stick, again, you need that layered approach. But unfortunately, by far, we've seen them come through email just because it's an easy threat vector for attackers to, in most cases, get pretty direct access to an end user.
No, that's a great answer. I totally agree. Just because phishing attacks, especially you mentioned even spear phishing, and I want to kind of stress something to you guys in the audience with the spear phishing. When spear phishing first kind of was mentioned as a concept, it was just a targeted attack, like we're going after one company, and so we tend to sort of think of spear phishing as exactly that. It's just, oh, that's attack that's actually destined for this particular holdings company or that bank or this investment firm or whatever it is. It's far more than that today. It's more like we've targeted a company. Now we're going to go do a whole bunch of diligence before email one is ever sent. And we're going to figure out who the CEO is and what bank dealings they're happening with, and if they're trying to acquire people. And we're going to look for all the different business related ways that we could get in. And in some cases, it goes back to like the CEO gift card scam, Mark, that you brought up earlier, where the best they can come up with is, all right, well, let's just do a gift card scam. I know that they're going to an event and I can see that the CMO is going to be at the event, so let's just pretend to be the CMO, because we saw that on LinkedIn that's where they're going. Cool. But in other cases, it's far more aggressive. There was actually a story last year that started off as a phishing scam, became a full-blown social engineering scam. It was basically a holdings company. I believe it was based in Germany, or maybe it was Switzerland, I forget which. And they had a subsidiary in India. And what they did was they pretended to be the CEO of the holdings company up in Switzerland, called the CEO of the subsidiary, convinced that person that they were the CEO of the holdings company, and said, we want to acquire this other company over here in India, and we want to use your money because that way we don't have to take the money out of us, and tax implications and blah, blah, blah. We just want to use your profits and pay for that. It's going to be $1 million. And even when it's forced to have conference calls, these guys had real big, the guts here, man, to do this. So use a different word there, but that would be inappropriate. And just to try and convince this India subsidiary CEO, they pretended to be the CEO and the legal counsel of the larger holdings company, and actually got all the way to fooling them to giving up $1 million, and then tried to get the second $1 million. And they finally kind of caught on that this was a scam. But it all started with a fish. And it started with this targeted spear phishing, where a ton of diligence gets done. And so this is why attackers love to use email, just because of the fact that there is an easy opportunity to gain access to literally any employee they want within your organization if they can figure out who that is. So kind of a big deal here. I think we're at the tail end of the questions, Mark. So I see that we're a couple minutes, early before the top of the hour. So I guess we're going to let class out early, and that's okay. Give everyone a couple of minutes of their day back. So Mark, thanks for the great conversation. I think it was really insightful, and I appreciate your input.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And yeah, very important topics these days. So hope it's been helpful for everyone.
I hope so as well. And with that, Emily, I'm going to pass things back to you to close us out.
All right, awesome, guys. Thank you so much for that wonderful conversation, Nick and Mark. I do want to remind everyone that if you missed any part of today's broadcast or you'd like to check out this webcast again, we'll be sending the recording out via email tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. Want to say thank you to our sponsor today, Barracuda MSP, and thank you to each and every one of you for joining us today. We'll see you next time.